Welcome back to the Marvel Movie Minute, a daily podcast in which we explore the films of the Marvel Cinematic Universe 1 minute at a time. In this, our 5th season, we are looking at Joe Johnston's 2011 film, Captain America, The First Avenger. I'm Andy Nelson from the Next Reel Film Podcast.
I'm Pete Wright, and welcome to a lesson in lighting evildoers.
That's how you do it. Today, we are talking about Minute 29, which begins with Dr. Zola interrupting Schmidt's portrait session and ends with Zola asking if he should give the order. Back on the show, we have the Doctor of the Dead himself. It's Doctor Arnold T. Blumberg. Hello.
Hi. Good to be back.
Good to be back here in Hydra headquarters. Of course, we're back in Schmidt's office lab, way up high in the mountains in the Alps. And let's start talking some Wagner here. Opera. Are you either of you fans of opera?
No.
I was a huge fan of Kill the Wabbit. Is that
that counts?
Does it count?
Sure,
I think I was a big fan of that. That's why I learned a little bit about opera, and then promptly stopped learning about opera. It's not really my jam. I was a singer in a past life, and so I had to perform certain operatic tracks as exercises, and I don't care for it.
Thanks for reminding me, by the way, about what's opera, Doc, because that's one of the other things for me. If I was exposed to opera at all in a significant way as a kid, it would have been that and Marx Brothers Night at the Opera. That's it.
There we go. I
think that's the key for me too, where it's like I can handle watching opera. I've sat through a few Ingmar Bergman operas, like operatic films, and I find it a difficult format for me to really connect with. And so it is definitely the things like What's Opera, Doc, or we were talking before the show, things like Black Swan, which integrate something like a ballet into the movie as kind of part of the story. And so I feel like I handle that better. And when it comes to opera, I know key opera pieces, but kind of sitting through it, I struggle with a little bit. It's just not for me. I know there are plenty of great operas out there, and I don't want to, say anything too bad about them, because I know there are plenty of great opera fans, and more power to them. It's just not for me. But one thing I do like about Wagner is how big they are, and you see Wagner used in such interesting ways because the opera music is so big. And here we come in as Zola walks into the lab here. We have an opera piece playing. It is I'm not going to say it. It's scene 3 from the Valkyrie. My Father Promised Me a Sword is the piece that we come in on. It's the first day of the stage festival in the first act. That's where we come in on. And then interestingly, it transitions to the funeral march, Twilight from Götterdämmerung, Twilight of the Gods, the third procession. So I feel like they wanted to have Wagner in here, but they wanted to have a few key moments. And we come in on this big singing here, it's big and it feels very operatic and it fits with kind of what we're seeing. But then as we get to the conversation toward the end of the minute, as they're talking about having found Erskine and, should we move forward with the plans, the music kind of takes on a little bit more of a menacing tone. It's kind of like these little kind of creepy sounds. And I feel like that's kind of where the funeral march, it felt like they wanted to blend them together to do that. So I thought that was an interesting thing. I don't think I ever would have been able to figure that out on my own without having, looked at the credits, gone through these tracks and tried figuring out what they were playing. A lot of opera research.
Yeah.
Does that mean then, because I was just following what you're dissecting there about how the music is used, does that mean then that it doesn't make any logical sense when you watch the scene then? Like that's playing, it shouldn't be playing like that.
Yeah, I mean, he's not flipping the record. It's right. It really doesn't fit at all, the fact that he's doing these two pieces. Then. Yeah, well, it's two different pieces. It's Götterdämmerung, which is Twilight of the Gods, and then it's the Valkyrie, and so it's two completely separate, from my understanding, two completely separate operas. I may be misinterpreting
You're not misinterpreting, but actually it is interesting. The Valkyrie and Götterdämmerung are parts 2 and 4 of what is called the Ring cycle. So in fact, it's a 17-hour operatic cycle consisting of 4 operas. And
Holy
so
cow.
the fact that these two are at least together, and often like, when you hear them performed, they'll be over the course of 4 nights. Like you don't have to sit through 17 hours.
I was going to say nobody
opera.
has time for that kind of stuff.
Yeah, no, but it is like it's essentially the Ring operatic universe. That's what we're talking about here, and these are 2 tracks from numbers 2 and 4 of the 4 of them.
Wait, so did Wagner put together the first operatic universe? Is this like a prequel to cinematic universes?
Yeah, that is. I just did that. I just did that. You're welcome. You're welcome, world. Wagner's operatic universe.
Look at that. That's fantastic.
And it's WOU. Whoa.
It's not wow.
Sometimes stuff just happens just right off the dome.
Mhm.
Whoa, that's going to stick.
You're amazing. It's amazing that you
just have to commit.
think that. That's exactly what you're doing. I appreciate that. I do like that maybe opera fans would note that there was kind of a shift in the music. It seems to me that, for the layperson like me who hears it, I'm not picking up on that. So to me, it just feels very much like something that fits well with what we're tuning in for.
That explains all those stories we heard back then of the older people walking out of the theater during that scene because they were just so offended
How dare they?
by the illogical cutting of the Wagner music. It's like, I'm done with this movie.
Yeah, right.
Exactly. Now, I want to ask you both about Zola as he walks in here. So he's walking into the lab fairly with a fast clip. He's got something to talk about with Schmidt, and then he kind of slows and pauses as he's looking to see what's happening. We don't see it yet, but we see that he sees the portrait and what is happening, and he sees Schmidt up standing in front of the window. If you look very carefully when Schmidt turns the light switch off, you get a tiny, tiny flash, like 1 frame of the actual Red Skull face before he goes into silhouette. And I think it's very interesting. But what do you think about this moment? Is this something that's new to Zola? Has he never seen Schmidt this way? Or is it just like, because Schmidt's always wearing his man mask, that he's just kind of not used to it? I was like, why is he have this moment of pause here?
I totally struggle with this every time, because I would have thought that them working in partnership is going to be would be something that they would have that more intimate relationship between them, that he would know already who he's working with, Zola. But in this case, not only does he attempt to hide himself, where he has already revealed himself to his painter, and not Zola, apparently, but then he unveils himself in a moment that doesn't feel dramatic to me. He just turns on the light, right? And so I find that interesting.
I've never, this is like many things. This has happened a lot where we've talked about things too. I've never really thought much about that. But it occurs to me, I don't know that I ever thought that he hadn't seen him before. I think, and I might be wrong, but I think it more speaks to the kind of power dynamic they have between the two of them. Zola's obviously very afraid of him. He's working for the kind of guy who's so mercurial he could decide any minute to shoot you. Like you don't know what's going to happen. He's treading a fine line here, every time he talks to him. And clearly, despite it doesn't make sense really, it's illogical, but he's a villain, so it doesn't have to. Despite the fact that his persona, you would argue, would be something he's probably proud of, and it does seem like he acts that way. It does seem like there might be an element of shame or discomfort sometimes with revealing himself. And it might be that the two of them have often had to interact in ways where Zola can't acknowledge that he's like, I see what you look like, and it's weird, So I feel like it's more about the fact that the two of them have this power relationship, and he's very nervous around him, and Red Skull kind of likes to keep himself in shadow, and Zola's trying to act like that's not a thing. This is fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's because it's like he walked in on him posing nude for a portrait or
Right.
something. Because even the
Exactly.
way that Schmidt says, "Is there something in particular you need?" Like it's almost like he's a little uncomfortable too.
Yes, exactly. And I get a feeling of shame, even though, again, like I said, it doesn't make sense, but it doesn't have to. He could have both at the same time. He's proud of it, but also he's uncomfortable about it.
Yeah.
And yet he's also having someone paint him. So,
Don't you think that's weird? Like, that's the place where we get vulnerability from Schmidt. Like, what he is Red Skull. It's a whole purpose is him exuding this power through demonstrating fear. Why is it in this moment of artistry that there is vulnerability in his character? I find that kind of bananas.
although, I mean, he's being painted and there's that whole idea of like, the portrait artist is trying to capture the person, and it's like a lowering of barriers, which is probably unusual for a man like that to feel like he's in that position, which, by the way, leads to something else about the painter, which I think is the next minute, so I'll save that. But
it's kind of a Sam Raimi reaction shot of the painter that we get here. Like, it just feels like, yeah.
Well, it's very brief. He's like, he feels like somebody who's being forced to do this. Like he seems uncomfortable. It's great.
Oh, yeah.
And I love how he's got like a palette just with all red.
Yeah.
It was a great little moment. This is a weird thing to suddenly think about, but do we think that, do we ever see any other part of Schmidt's body other than his head? Like, his hands, I think, are always gloved. So do you think that they were trying to perhaps, instead of just like, well, it's weird that he just has a red skull, let's just say all of him is this way, and he now has to cover up the only part of him that is exposed, which would be his head?
Could be.
Is that something that you think that they thought of? Like, do you think he's all red?
I mean, it's a possibility, I guess.
It's really interesting. Is he like The Mask? He's like Jim Carrey. It's just red until it fades into skin. Is that how it works?
Well, where would the skin be? Like, that's what, yeah, because, well, I'm just wondering if he has any.
He's all red.
I feel like maybe he's just all red. He's not just a red skull.
He's a red person.
He's a red person.
Wow.
That's the other thing, too, by the way, that fits back with my idea of his sense of his self. I mean, because ultimately, again, drop all the Hydra dancing around the truth kind of crap. He's a Nazi. So
yeah,
they're based entirely on the master race idea, except he's not anymore, is he? Because he's a red skull and, like, as you point out, potentially red all over. He is not the Aryan ideal anymore. And yet, in his head, he still has to believe that, and he still has to act as a leader. And maybe that's where the shame and the discomfort and everything comes from, is that he knows that he's no longer the image of the very thing that he feels in his heart he is and has to represent.
Huh.
And so he's become a monster, and he can't acknowledge that, or it ruins everything that he thinks.
Yeah.
There, I deconstructed the Red Skull psychology.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, you could. Yeah, I can make that case. I can get on board with that.
He's an interesting character, and this scene is such an interesting one. The way that it plays out, the way that it's this interruption, and the other thing I had a note of is the fact that there's obviously, as we find out, that he has been looking for Dr. Erskine and has found him. But what's interesting is, like, when Zola comes in, he clearly is coming in because he had heard this. He had heard that he had found that Schmidt had found Erskine, and they were, what was the next steps? But when he comes in, it's like Schmidt has forgotten that, because he's like, "Did you need something? Why are you here?" It plays so strange. This scene is such a strange scene. I mean, I really enjoy the scene, but it just, every time I watch it, especially as I really kind of study it perhaps too much, I find like I'm asking all these questions. I'm like, what is this weird interaction between these two here?
Well, it also, I guess this goes into the next minute, though, so I can't really connect it entirely yet, but it also goes to the fact that, in a way, it looks like he's not really letting Zola in on everything, and he's kind of cutting him out of the action.
Yeah.
So, he's on a need-to-know basis for a lot of stuff, for whatever reason.
That's a good point. Like, what is Zola's role? I mean, we know his role is to, like, figure out the science of the Tesseract and kind of, he's going to use it to kind of enhance all of the weapons and the designs that he has had. But I mean, is he kind of stepping out of his zone as far as what he's supposed to be focusing on by even talking to him about Erskine?
I mean, it could be, and it could be the fact that Zola, like all of them, is power hungry, and maybe he wants a little bit more than he's got. And so there might even be an undercurrent of a power struggle there between the two of them. So he's keeping Zola at arm's length, like, you deal with your bit, but you don't need to know the other stuff I'm doing. And that could be what's going on.
Yeah, there's an element. What I like about Zola is, to a certain extent, he feels like the new Erskine. Like we saw in the flashback in the last few minutes, how Schmidt had really wanted this serum from Erskine, and kind of led to a point where now we know Erskine fled and has just been rediscovered. But Zola is kind of the new Erskine. He's the new Darth Vader for the Emperor, right? He's the new number 2, and he's kind of helping him out. But he's really there to kind of do the science and kind of make all of the plans work. And so I think it is an interesting thing that there perhaps is maybe a little bit of jealousy too. Like, he's got that jealous sense that I'm the guy right now doing your science for you, right? Why are you looking for him? It's an interesting perspective for sure.
That is interesting. And one, can you imagine if Darth Vader were as whelpy as Zola is in this movie? That would have been a different take. And two, it gets to part of the level of commitment that seems to waver. And we've talked about this before. Like, what is Zola really into it for, right? Is he into it as a measure of subservience, as a measure of allegiance to Schmidt? Or is it possible that he just wants to make sure he's on the inside because he is truly stunned by the science and wants to be a part of it? And I think that's also a piece that is at work in this. He doesn't, like, to your point, he doesn't want to be left out, but he also might not be wholly evil at this point. He just loves the power of the science and doesn't want it to get too far away from him.
I think that's a lot of it. Yeah, I really enjoy the idea that he is this person who's, I mean, we kind of got that sense that he seemed a little nervous when they were first playing with the Tesseract and like it was doing all of this crazy stuff. And he was like freaked out that Schmidt wanted to crank it up to 11. But then once it actually worked, it's like his eyes got so big. His eyes are saucers. Yeah, he might as well have been rubbing his hands together and twirling a mustache. He was so excited about what he was going to be able to do with all of his designs and everything. So there is an interesting element to that for sure. I also think it's I love the way that the scene plays out where he says, "I don't see why you need to concern yourself. I can't imagine he will ever succeed." And then he kind of looks at Schmidt, and if you look, there's just ever so slight a cocking of Schmidt's head, and then Zola comes back with again. The way that he delivers that it's fantastic.
I love that, and again, that to me is another thing about, like, there's this constant walking on eggshells with dealing with Schmidt that he's got to do. And by the way, my opportunity to say the other person in this whole week. Love Toby Jones. He's one of those kind of guys that when he shows up, he just makes everything better. I can't remember now the timeline of things, but I know that when I saw him, I think he'd already been on Doctor Who. He was in a really great Doctor Who episode. And then I was becoming more aware of him as a character actor in a lot of things. And around this time, it seemed like he was popping up everywhere. And when I saw him show up in a Marvel movie, I was like, awesome, Toby Jones. And of course, what's really great is it winds up panning out pretty nicely for a variety of reasons, beyond just this movie, which is really cool. So he's a great addition. Did you enjoy the way they ended up treating the Zola character? Like, obviously he's just a human here, but like the way that they kind of modified him for the later films, did that that was actually kind of a clever way to kind of handle that comic angle? I love that. Yeah. I love the whole reveal of him. There are a lot of, not that suddenly this becomes one of your later seasons. Not that there aren't a lot of problems with the idea that Hydra has just been running everything for decades. That has its own issues, but But if you're going to do it, the way they used his character was that's a great example, by the way, of what we were talking about earlier this week. That was, to me, a great adaptation of the silly version of Zola that we know from the comics. It's like, all right, we're not going to have a robot walking around with a screen in his stomach. But to do that was a beautiful way of grabbing some of that visual, some of that idea, and yet making it work really well in the story. And I love that they kept his character involved like that. It was great.
No, it was cool. And he is so great. He does a great job, especially in scenes like this where he's kind of playing off of Schmidt. So it's very fun. We do have another character here. We talked about him briefly, the portrait artist. He's credited as Johann Schmidt's artist. This is David McHale. I want to do a quick IMDb game with you too on David McHale. I probably, unless you are very familiar with him as an actor, I'll probably just tell you what the 4 films that IMDb says he is known for. Do either of you want to guess, or do you just want me to tell you?
I sometimes pick out character actors and immediately remember them from a lot of stuff, but I'm not placing him, so I'll probably need to be told.
Pete, what about you?
I've got nothing.
Well, he's definitely more of a TV actor, although he has been in a number of films. And it ended up being this as his first known for. The second one is a show called A Touch of Frost, which is a British show, I believe.
Yeah, long-running British detective drama.
Right, a police show. And the third one is Sweeney Todd, the Demon Barber of Fleet Street. He plays the minister in that film.
Oh, okay.
And last but not least, he is the 5th geographer in Paddington.
The 5th geographer.
The 5th.
I believe it's a montage of geographers. I can't remember now. We'll be talking about that in the next reel soon, so I'll be able to try. We're going to have to look for him, Pete, when we talk about that.
For sure.
But yeah, it's kind of fun to see. But yeah, I mean, you look at his TV work, he is very robust in TV and has done a lot of stuff. He did pass away, sadly, at the end of 2021.
Okay.
But he had kept quite busy. So a very fun little part here that he has. I enjoy him immensely in this. It's one of these potentially thankless roles because he's an artist who has no lines, but the moments that he gets with his looks, I think that he's given some stuff to work with. It's fun.
Yeah, straight up terrified.
I think it's the next minute has his moment. That's like the moment that shows you that there are no small parts.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
for sure.
I like that the folder that Zola is holding. He walks in with, it says Hydra Abteilung, which means the Hydra department, which I love the fact that the Nazis have it. It's just another department. It's just the Hydra department.
There is a chain of command straight to the Führer.
So funny.
Which is exactly the point, right? Like that's exactly what he's trying to overthrow and obscure in the process.
Yes, exactly.
So good.
Yeah, and I mean it goes right back to the comics. I still remember the very first I think it's this. I'm sure there'll be somebody out there far clearer of mind than me, but I think it was like the '60s retelling of the origin story that they did as a flashback, where they showed him being picked originally by Hitler, and there's like the scene where like he just kind of like walks into Hitler's office from like a back door, and Hitler's like, "Ah!" It's like, you're always around, and Red Skull says something to him like, you're safe for now. And it's like he's already telling him, well, I'm going to take over, but So,
right. At no point is the Red Skull subtle in his dealings.
Walks right to Hitler's room. Keep doing that.
Well,
sorry.
He definitely. I don't know. I can see reacting the way that Zola does when you see it, because it's just like, it is just off-putting. It is just straight up off-putting to have you that way.
Yeah.
Well, and that's actually really funny, because you think about the Red Skull dealing with Hitler as sort of the Red Skull is Hitler's Zola, right? There's always somebody creepier who's just kind of lurking around, and the fact that Red Skull gets to be the aspirational sidekick to someone else in the world, I think is really charming.
Yeah.
That's a piece we don't get to see in the movie.
There is a scripted moment between Zola and Schmidt after Schmidt kind of says that we found him, where Zola says, Berlin doesn't feel this is a proper use of their resources. And then Schmidt replies, and you are now their loyal servant? Berlin, if they care, can discuss it with me personally.
Ah, interesting.
There we go.
An interesting little bit of tension between the two.
That's more tension than we actually get spoken. Yeah, right.
Absolutely. Maybe they decided, we already have this feeling of tension in the air. We don't necessarily need to drive the point home.
Yeah.
Could be.
Yeah.
And dramatic lighting, right? He gets the chance to display tension in shadow and light, and it's great.
Oh, yes. That's what I was saying last time, is that I love this set, and it gives him that great opportunity to do that wonderful silhouette, and it's just fantastic.
It's a great hint, because, astute film goers might have thought that they caught a flash of that Red Skull face when he first turns the lights off, because it is there. But what I love about the way the scene plays out is you really get this sense that you're looking at the Red Skull, but you just can't see him. And it's just like it's driving you nuts because you keep looking at it like, is there a hint in there? Can I see? I love the way that they decided to first kind of play this. It's very clever and mysterious.
Yeah.
So we get to these surveillance photos of Erskine that are laying on Schmidt's desk. They're square photos, which I thought was kind of interesting. We're going to talk about the photos on the desk in a sec. But one thing I love, there are Hydra logos everywhere. I just love that they are so obsessed with these Hydra logos that they just throw them everywhere.
I love villains that know that branding is an important and essential part of the process.
Absolutely. Hey, okay, but this is a good question for you, and we should ask more of our guests this. What do you think of the Hydra logo? Does it make sense to you to have a skull with a bunch of octopus tentacles, as opposed to a Hydra, which is a creature with a whole bunch of heads, which they even say, cut one head off and two more grow in its place? Does the logo end up making sense to that end?
Well, not really, but it's a really cool logo.
It's a great logo.
Because it's a great conflation of things like Nazi iconography, like the SS and the skull and the Totenkopf. I mean, it's a good combination of stuff that looks like it would have been thought of and real, mixed with a little bit of the Marvel fanciful thing. And of course, that's been around for a long time. So it's a really cool idea. And really, who cares about logic when you got like a skull with tentacles that can reach out around the world? It's like death is spreading everywhere. It's a fantastic logo. The part that's silly is if you're truly trying to take over the world, and apparently, as we will later find out, doing it clandestinely for like 70 years, maybe don't put your logo on everything. Maybe don't advertise.
Anything they are well branded.
But boy, they really want that brand to be out there.
I like to think that there's, a part of me that says, I think that they are trying to connect the Pirates of the Caribbean universe with the Marvel Cinematic Universe by saying that Davy Jones was actually the original founder of Hydra, and they just put his skull on their iconography.
All right, I'm sold on that one.
One other thing on his desk before we get into the photos, the last note is that I like the bookends that Schmidt has. I can't tell. They look like some sort of four-legged animal. It makes me wonder if they are wolves, going back to the whole thing with Odin. And we talked about his ravens before, but also, the wolves.
The wolves of Fenric kind of thing.
I thought that might be another element that he has trying to connect himself to this mythology that he's been researching.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I feel terrible that I love these things so much, and I've spent so much time either talking about them, on shows like this or writing about it. And yet, as people close to me will attest, I'm one of the least observant people you'll probably ever meet. It's like I can watch something 400 times and I will never have seen the things on his desk. It's like it's just invisible to me. It's weird, the things that I focus on and the things that I don't. I have missed so many things, but it also means every time I revisit something, I find something brand new because I never saw it before.
Right. All right. Well, let's talk about these photos. We've got the surveillance photos of Dr. Erskine that they had been taking on the streets of Brooklyn. Square photos. Pete, you're a photographer. Did you do any research on cameras of the era that might be taking square photos?
the cameras, it's hard to say exactly what camera was, in use, but the lines of the camera and the manufacturer, the Rolleiflex camera, the Rolleiflex lines, it was a German company, Franke and Heidecke, which was later changed to Rollewerk. But those cameras are legendary. And for collectors today, getting these twin lens reflex cameras and having these in your collection is really, really fun because they are waist cameras, right? So they're top-down viewfinders. So you hold it at your waist and you look down to shoot. And these are the cameras that were largely used by war photographers to document the war. And so it would not be a surprise to hear that they were using one of these old Rolleiflex cameras with their original glass, like the Carl Zeiss lens. You still hear, Zeiss lenses are still incredibly popular. They're just wonderfully machined pieces of kit. And so this is likely the camera that you would be using. In fact, Robert Capa is one of the most famous war photographers, World War II, and he used what probably is the same camera to document the war that Hydra is using in their spy work here. So
interesting.
Yes.
Okay.
And they were around. I mean, these were the cameras. It's actually interesting that we start at the effectively the World's Fair, because this camera was an award-winning piece of equipment at the World's Fair in 1937. Like the Rolleiflex Automat camera, which would have been shooting at this time. So I think that's a really cool line, and there's a lot of history on these particular cameras. My hunch is that's what we're seeing.
Well, there's something visually interesting. I guess we're just so used to photos that are 3x5 or that kind of that sort of shape, where when you see square photos, there's something striking about them, and I like that they use them here because it does make them feel different in some capacity.
Oh yeah, for sure. And a classic, the fact that they're, you can see the artifacts of the development process on each sheet, and I think that's really a fun and a classy addition to just such a quick moment.
Yeah. Yeah, even how some of them look more black and white, some of them are a little more reddish, almost like the chemicals didn't set right or something.
Yeah, they didn't quite finish.
Yeah, that's cool. All right, well, I don't think I have anything else for this minute. We're going to come back and find out what the answer is to Zola's question. Shall I give the order? What is Schmidt going to say? All right, any last thoughts from either of you about this minute?
I'm good.
Fini.
All right. Arnold, would you like to remind everyone again where they can track down you and more of the stuff that you're working on?
You can hear my wife Natalie and I talk about all sorts of movies from horror and science fiction and beyond, many of them very bad and some of them very good. On our podcast, Fools in the House.
What's an example of one of each? What's a bad one that you talked about and a good one?
Well, we've talked about things like John Carpenter's The Thing and most recently, actually, Alien. But we've also talked about some really terrible movies. Can't remember if we talked about Chupacabra movie set at the Alamo or not. I know we watched it. There's some bad stuff out there, but also fun. So we try to cover the range.
I'm not going to lie to you. I half expected you to say, well, we've watched The Thing and Alien, but we've also watched some good movies. And maybe if Arnold's going to come on here and be a provocateur, we're going to change the show.
No, not in this case. I'm not, because those are unassailable. Well, they didn't used to be, I guess. Well, one of them anyway.
Yeah.
But so that's schoolsinthehouse.com. And you can also check out my publishing company at atbpublishing.com.
Fantastic. Well, thanks as always. Pete, always a pleasure.
Maybe we should try for a photograph instead of a painting. Yeah? Yeah.
Until next time, true believers.
Marvel Movie Minute is a production of True Story FM. Engineering by Andy Nelson. This season's music is Spread the News by Anthony Vega, and this season's show art is by Winston Yabo. Find the show at truestory.fm, and if your podcast app allows ratings and reviews, consider doing that for this show.